He hired a mute servant, not knowing she was the legendary ghost wolf that saved him. The halls of Castle Valdron were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. The torches along the stone walls flickered, casting long, uneven shadows that twisted like living things. Lord Kalen strode through them, his boots echoing against the cold floor. His cloak, dark as midnight, trailed behind him, brushing over the worn tapestries that told stories of the kingdom's victories and its losses. Kalen was a man marked by battles. His face carried scars, not from age but from fire and steel. His eyes, a gray as cold as the winter river, held a loneliness that even the richest halls could not banish. First, the people whispered about him, about his ruthlessness, his brilliance, and the strange sadness that followed him like a shadow. That evening, Kalen's steward had brought him news of a new servant. The girl was quiet, they said, and small, almost fragile in appearance. But there was something about her that caught Kalen's attention immediately, though he could not explain why. When she entered the hall, she did not bow or speak. She simply stood there, her posture straight, her hands folded in front of her. Her hair was silver in the torchlight, falling past her shoulders like mist over the mountains. Her eyes were sharp, piercing, a gray so deep it seemed to see through the walls and into Kalen's thoughts. "You may go," he said to the steward, his voice low but commanding. The girl made no sound. Bang. She only inclined her head slightly, a small, precise movement, and followed him silently as he walked deeper into the castle. Kalen's first thought was that she was timid, but as they moved through the hallways, he noticed how her eyes never wavered. She watched every flicker of light, every shadow. But her movements were careful, deliberate, almost like a predator testing its surroundings.
He had dealt with many servants before.
Some tried to curry favor with smiles or false flattery. Others dared to disobey him. But this one, she seemed neither afraid nor obedient. She simply existed, and in her silence she held a power he could not yet name. Kalen stopped in the grand dining hall. The long table was polished, candles burning faintly along its edges. The girl stood at the end, her presence somehow filling the room more than the fire or the torches could.
"You will serve here,"
Kalen said, "and you will follow my instructions without question. Do you understand?" The girl tilted her head slightly. Then, without a word, she moved to arrange the chairs and set the table. Her hands were gentle, precise, and careful. Kalen watched her, fascinated. There was no hesitation, no clumsiness. Only motion that was silent, perfect, and aware. Days passed, and the girl's presence became a rhythm in the castle. Kalen could not help but notice her in unexpected ways. How she moved through the corridors like a shadow. How her eyes followed him when he did not think she was watching. How she seemed to understand him in ways no one else could. But the first true sign that she was not what she seemed came one night when Kalen walked the walls during a storm. Rain lashed against the stone, wind shrieking through the towers, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant lightning. He paused at a window, staring into the dark forest that surrounded the castle. He could hear the distant cries of wolves echoing through the valley, though the storm made it hard to tell if they were real or only in his mind. A movement caught his eye, a shadow, swift and silent, darting among the trees. His heart quickened. Wolves had been roaming the forests for weeks, unnaturally bold and aggressive. But this was something different. Before he could react, a servant screamed from the stables, but Kalen ran toward the sound, the storm tearing at his cloak, lightning illuminating the way. When he arrived, he found a group of masked men, armed and ready to strike. His own men were few, caught off guard by the sudden attack. Kalen drew his sword, its blade gleaming even in the rain. Bah! He fought with skill born of years on the battlefield, but the attackers were many, and they pressed hard against him. He felt a sharp pang of doubt, a rare fear.
He had faced armies, monsters, and dark magic, but never had he felt so cornered, so exposed. Then she appeared.
The girl moved through the chaos as if the world slowed for her. She leapt forward with a strength that seemed impossible for someone so slight. Her hands were not gentle now. They struck with precision, knocking weapons aside, disarming attackers without hesitation. She moved with a speed and grace that made her almost impossible to follow. But Kalen watched in disbelief as she fought, a silent storm in the rain. She protected him without a thought for herself, her movements almost animal in their fluidity. It was as if she was part of the shadows themselves, an extension of the night and the storm. When the last of the attackers fell, she stood before him, calm and unreadable. The storm raged around them, rain soaking both of them, lightning reflecting in her gray eyes. Kalen felt a strange mixture of fear and awe. What are you? He asked, his voice low, trembling with adrenaline and shock. The girl said nothing. She only tilted her head, the same quiet motion that had first drawn his attention. For the first time in years, Kalen felt completely unguarded. There was something in her presence that unsettled him. Not because she was weak, but because she was stronger than anything he had ever faced, not just in body but in will, in spirit. That night, he could not sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his chamber, thinking of her, thinking of the way she had moved, the way she had saved him without a single word. The storm outside had faded, but the echo of her presence remained, like a shadow that would not leave him. The next morning, Kalen observed her as she went about her duties. She carried water, arranged the rooms, and even fed the castle's animals with the same care and precision she had shown during the attack. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation. Only focus, strength, and a quiet intensity that both frightened and fascinated him. He remembered the old stories, whispered in the forest and villages beyond the castle walls. Stories of a legendary ghost wolf, a creature that saved villages from invaders, a protector that was never truly human. People said she appeared silently, moved faster than any hunter, and disappeared into the night before anyone could see her face. Kalen shivered. He could not shake the feeling that the girl before him was connected to those stories, though he had no proof. There was an air about her, a subtle power that seemed to hum beneath her skin, in her very being. In the following days, Kalen tried to speak to her, to draw some sign of her thoughts or feelings, but she remained silent, her gray eyes calm, observing him without fear or favor. And yet, when he walked through the halls, he felt her watching him, waiting, as if she understood him more than any person had in his life. One evening, Kalen decided to take a walk along the castle walls. The moon was high, silver and cold. The forests beyond were dark, dense, and full of secrets. He sensed the wind carrying more than just the scent of rain. It carried whispers, shadows, and the weight of stories long forgotten. He paused at a corner of the battlements, looking down at the forest floor. Then he saw her, standing at the edge of the trees, silent, watching him. The way she moved was not human. Her hair shimmered like mist. Her eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. She was beautiful, terrifying, and impossible all at once. Kalen's heart pounded. The stories, the legends, they all came rushing back. the ghost wolf. The protector who appeared when danger threatened. And now here she was, standing in the forest, looking at him with eyes that seemed to see everything, even the parts of himself he had tried to hide. He wanted to call her name, to ask her to come closer, to understand. But he did not. Something told him that speaking would break the spell, that this moment existed beyond words. He only watched, frozen by a mixture of fear, awe, and a longing he did not yet understand. Suddenly, a howl ripped through the forest. Not the howl of an ordinary wolf, but something deeper, colder, more ancient. Kaelin's blood ran cold. The girl's hair moved in the wind, her posture tense, ready for action. And then, as quickly as it had begun, she vanished into the shadows of the forest, leaving only silence and the echo of her presence behind. Kaelin stood on the battlements long after she disappeared. The wind whipped around him, carrying the faint sound of distant howls. He knew in that moment that the girl he had hired was no ordinary servant. Despair. She was something older, something legendary, something dangerous. And yet, in the quiet of the night, he realized he wanted to find her again. Not to control her, but to understand her. To see the truth behind the eyes that held centuries of stories and sorrow. He did not know her name. He did not know her past. But one thing was certain. The ghost wolf was in his castle, and he would never be the same again. And somewhere in the dark forest, she watched him back. The night was silent again, but the air between them was electric, full of unspoken tension, fear, and something dangerously close to trust. Kaelin did not sleep that night, and he would not sleep again until he knew the truth of the girl who had saved him. The castle of Valdrin awoke slowly beneath a pale morning sky. Mist clung to the stones like a thin veil, curling along the edges of the towers and settling in the courtyards. Lord Kaelin walked through the halls, his cloak brushing the floor, still restless from the events of the stormy night. His mind was tangled with thoughts of the silent girl, the servant he had hired, the woman who had saved his life, and the shadow in her eyes that hinted at something more. She moved through the castle with her usual quiet grace. Kaelin watched from a distance as she carried water for the kitchens, brushed the floors, and tended to the animals. Every movement was precise, almost ritualistic. It was not the work of an ordinary servant. There was a control in her, a discipline that spoke of training, of survival, of something beyond the ordinary. Kaelin's curiosity gnawed at him. He wanted to understand her, to pierce the wall of silence that separated them. But he also feared the answer. What if the stories were true? What if she truly was the ghost wolf the protector whispered about in the villages beyond the forests? The thought both terrified and fascinated him. Later that day, he called her to the library, a room filled with towering shelves of ancient books, maps, and scrolls. She entered silently, eyes steady, hands folded. Kaelin studied her for a long moment. "You are not like any servant I have ever had," he said quietly. "Bear." His voice carried a strange mix of admiration and caution. "You are strong, precise, dangerous." The girl tilted her head slightly but said nothing. Her gray eyes remained fixed on him, unblinking, unreadable. "I want to understand you," he continued.
I want to know who you are. If you are here to serve, then serve.
"But if there is more, if there is something hidden, you must tell me." she remained silent. Yet in the quiet, Kaelin felt her attention, her awareness, as if she were listening not only to his words, but to his thoughts. It unsettled him, and at the same time, he could not look away. The day passed with little change. Kaelin tried to focus on his duties, the endless meetings with advisors, the planning of defenses for the kingdom. Yet in every shadow, in every flicker of movement, he sensed her presence. It was not just her silence that drew his attention. It was the feeling of power that lingered around her. The servants whispered to one another, casting nervous glances at the girl. Something about her unsettled them, though they could not explain why. That evening, Kaelin took his walk along the walls again. The wind was calm, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. He looked into the forests that stretched endlessly beyond the castle, and there, at the edge of the trees, he saw her standing. Her hair shimmered in the moonlight, silver like mist, her posture straight and perfect. She watched him, waiting, silent and unmoving. For a long moment he simply observed her, his heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. The wind shifted, and he could almost hear a soft growl, the low vibration of something ancient and powerful. It made his blood run cold. "Why do you watch me like this?" he whispered, though he knew she could not answer. She did not move. And yet, he felt her attention pressing on him, as if she could read the questions he had not dared to speak aloud. Kaelin's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden urgent howl from the forest. The sound was long and deep, echoing through the valleys and shaking the very air. It was not the howl of an ordinary wolf. It carried intelligence, emotion, and an ancient hunger. The girl's ears, if she had ears, twitched. Her eyes glowed faintly, a subtle shimmer that made the night seem alive. In an instant, she turned, moving toward the forest with a speed and grace that made Kaelin's heart leap. He ran after her, calling her name. But she did not stop. The forest swallowed her in shadows, yet Kaelin could feel her presence. It was close, impossibly close, like a heartbeat in the air around him. And then she emerged, carrying a wounded deer between her arms. The sight was strange and haunting, yet there was no cruelty in it. She knelt, whispering to the animal in a language Kaelin could not understand, her voice so soft that it might have been imagined. The deer's wounds seemed to mend under her touch, slowly, miraculously.
Kaelin stared in disbelief.
This was no ordinary servant. She was something more, something legendary. And yet, even as he watched, he felt the weight of her burden. She was bound to a duty he could not fathom, a protector not by choice but by a force older than the kingdom itself. She returned to the castle before dawn, the deer healed and free to run into the forest. Kaelin confronted her in the quiet of the hall, his voice barely above a whisper. "You are the ghost wolf," he said finally, naming what he had feared to speak aloud. Her gray eyes met his, unwavering and calm. She did not confirm nor deny. Instead, she tilted her head, the same small gesture that had drawn his attention when she first arrived. Kaelin felt frustration rise, but also a strange respect. She was not a creature to be commanded, not a servant to be tamed. She existed on her own terms. And yet she had chosen, somehow, to remain near him. Days turned into weeks. Kaelin observed her, learning her patterns, her strengths, her silences. He discovered that she was more than strong. She was intelligent, patient, and fiercely loyal, though only to those she chose to protect. Villagers and guards began to whisper tales of the girl with the silver hair, the one who moved like a shadow and could strike faster than any man's eye could follow. Kaelin could no longer deny the truth. She was the ghost wolf. The protector of legends, the savior of those in need. And yet, in her silence, there was a sadness that drew him closer than fear. She carried centuries of stories in her eyes, memories of battles, losses, and duties too heavy for most hearts. One night, Kaelin ventured into the forest alone, carrying only a lantern and his sword. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain and pine. He walked deeper than he had ever dared, following instincts he did not fully understand. Pyre. Suddenly the trees parted, revealing a small clearing bathed in silver moonlight. There she stood, waiting, her gray eyes fixed on him. The air between them was charged, heavy with unspoken words. "You protect me," Kaelin said, his voice breaking slightly. "Even when I do not ask, even when I cannot understand." Bah. She did not answer. Yet in her gaze he saw a flicker of acknowledgement, of recognition. She was bound to protect, yes, but there was choice in her eyes too. She had chosen him, in some way he could not yet comprehend. Kaelin stepped closer, the lantern casting trembling shadows across his face. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "Can I trust you?" Her eyes softened slightly, and for the first time, Kaelin saw a spark of something human beneath the legend. A flicker of vulnerability, a glimpse of the woman within the ghost wolf. But before he could say anything else, a distant howl rose from the forest. Sharper, angrier than before. The ghost wolf's ears twitched, her body tensed, and she vanished into the shadows before he could react. Bay. Kaelin ran after her, but she had disappeared, leaving only the whisper of movement in the night and the echo of the howl that filled the forest. Kaelin returned to the castle alone, drenched in sweat and doubt. The forest was quiet now, but the feeling of her presence lingered, heavy and unrelenting. He realized that he was no longer merely curious about her. He was captivated, drawn to her strength, her silence, and the mystery she carried.
The days that followed were filled with tension and silent understanding.
The prow, the move roared and protecting, guiding. Kaelin could feel her near him at all times, though he never knew when she would act. Kaelin could feel her near him at all times. And every time he caught her gaze, he felt the weight of centuries in her eyes, the pull of a story too long to be told in words. He began to speak less, to observe more. He watched her as she tended to the castle, fought unseen dangers, and moved through the world with a grace that defied explanation. But in the quiet moments, when the castle was still and the wind whispered through the towers, he thought of the stories, the tales of the ghost wolf who saved those in need, who vanished before anyone could see her face.
And now he understood. The legend was real.
The ghost wolf was here, and she was not just a story. Yet even as he understood, a question burned in his mind. Who was she truly? What had shaped her into the protector of legends? And, most importantly, why had she chosen him? He did not know the answers, but one night, as the castle slept and the moon hung heavy and silver in the sky, Kaelin found her watching him again from the edge of the forest. And for the first time he realized he wanted her to speak. Not because he needed her words, but because he wanted to hear the story behind the eyes that held centuries of secrets. The forest was silent, but the air between them was alive with possibility, tension, and the unspoken promise of something more. The ghost wolf had revealed herself in small ways, but the truth of her heart, the story of her past, remained a secret. And Kaelin knew, deep in his bones, that he would not rest until he learned it. The night wind carried her presence like a song, haunting and beautiful. And in that song, Kaelin understood something terrifying and exhilarating. He had been touched by a legend and his life would never be the same again.
The forest beyond Castle Valdren had grown restless.
A cold wind ran through the trees, carrying whispers and distant, echoing howls. Lord Caelan rode along the narrow path, his horse's hooves barely making a sound against the soft earth. Beside him, the mute servant, the ghost wolf, walked with a grace that made her seem almost unreal. Her eyes glimmered with the faint light of the rising moon, and every movement was precise, almost predatory. Caelan had begun to rely on her more than he cared to admit. She was not just a protector, she was a guide, a partner in the quiet, unspoken battles that plagued the kingdom. Since the attack in the storm, he had come to understand that her silence was not a weakness, but a shield, and yet every moment with her brought both fascination and unease. They rode toward the northern border of the kingdom, where rumors of dark creatures had begun to spread. Villagers whispered of shadows moving in the night, of crops failing under strange curses, and of wolves that seemed too intelligent to be ordinary. Caelan did not believe in mere stories anymore. He had seen too much, and he had fought alongside someone who could vanish into the night like a ghost.
The road narrowed as they entered a valley and the mist thickened.
Beck Collins slowed his horse, scanning the trees. Something moved ahead, a shadow that was too large and too fast to be human. His hand went to the hilt of his sword, but the ghost wolf was already ahead of him, vanishing into the fog with effortless speed. Caelan followed, though he could barely see her form. Her movements were fluid, silent, and perfectly controlled. The shadows seemed to bend around her, as if the night itself obeyed her will. They reached a clearing where a small group of villagers had gathered, terrified and desperate. A dark mist hovered over the ground, twisting like fingers reaching for them. Caelan's heart pounded. He had fought curses and dark magic before, but this was different. This was alive, a force that seemed to hunger for fear. The ghost wolf stepped forward, her presence commanding the space. The villagers stepped back instinctively. Caelan watched as she raised her hands, not in attack but in control. The mist recoiled, almost as if it recognized her power. She moved with precision, circling the darkness, guiding it away from the villagers. Caelan's awe grew with every motion. This was no mere protector of legends. This was a force of nature, calm and dangerous, bound to a purpose he could barely comprehend. Once the mist dissipated, the ghost wolf turned to Caelan, her eyes steady, almost questioning. For a moment he felt a connection he had never experienced before. She had saved him countless times, yet this time it was more than protection. It was guidance, a lesson in restraint and strength. Caelan dismounted, walking toward her carefully. "You do not fight for yourself," he said softly. "You fight for them, of me, for others. But why?" She did not answer. Instead, she looked at the villagers, ensuring they were safe, before her gaze returned to him. In her eyes, he saw centuries of stories, battles, losses, sacrifices, and beneath that, something fragile, something human. Caelan felt a pang of understanding and sorrow. He realized that she had carried this burden alone for longer than he could imagine. And he had been too blind, too self-absorbed to see it. As they continued toward the northern border, Caelan found himself speaking more, sharing small stories of his childhood, his fears, and the burdens of leadership. She listened, always silent, but her attention was unwavering. Her eyes softened at times, though only fleetingly. In her quiet, he found something he had long thought lost, a mirror for his own loneliness. That night they camped under the stars. The ghost wolf built the fire with swift, controlled movements, and Kalen sat beside her, his hands brushing against the warmth of the flames. The forest was alive with distant sounds, the howl of wolves and the rustle of unseen creatures. Yet with her there, he felt a strange calm. "You have saved me more than once," he said finally, breaking the silence. "And I cannot repay you.
But I want to understand you. I want to know your story."
She turned her eyes toward him, gray and reflective. For a long moment, he thought he saw a flicker of emotion, something almost like trust. Then, as always, she looked away, silent, unreadable. The days passed with their routine, Kalen leading the way, the ghost wolf guiding and protecting. Villagers began to speak of them as a pair, though none truly understood the woman who moved through the shadows. They called her a spirit, a legend, a ghost of the forest. Kalen knew she was all of these things, and more. And with every encounter, every act of protection, the bond between them deepened. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, they reached a ruined watchtower. The place was old, abandoned, and filled with the remnants of past battles. Kalen climbed the stones, his heart heavy with memories, and the ghost wolf followed silently behind. From the top of the tower, he could see the entire valley stretching before him. The wind carried the scent of pine, rain, and something darker, something that made the hairs on his neck stand on end.
He turned to the ghost wolf.
"But there is danger coming," he said quietly. "Something powerful, something old." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time Kalen noticed a flash of fear. Or was it anticipation? She crouched slightly, as if readying herself, muscles coiled and tense. As night fell, shadows began to move in the forest below. Kalen could feel the weight of them, a presence that pulsed with dark intent. The ghost wolf stood beside him, silent but alert. Her eyes glimmered in the moonlight, and Kalen understood. She was ready to face this threat, whatever it was. The attack came suddenly, a wave of dark figures moving through the trees. Kalen drew his sword, fighting with skill and precision, but the ghost wolf was already ahead of him, moving faster than his eye could follow. She struck with strength and grace, disarming enemies without a sound, guiding them back into the shadows. Kalen realized then that she was not just protecting him, she was shaping the battlefield, controlling the flow of the fight. And through it all, she remained calm, her focus absolute. When the last of the shadows fled into the forest, the ghost wolf returned to his side. Her eyes met his, and for the first time she allowed herself a small gesture, a tilt of the head, almost like acknowledgement. Kalen felt a shiver run through him. But he understood then that their bond had deepened beyond words, beyond fear, beyond duty. The following day, Kalen and the ghost wolf returned to the castle. The hall seemed emptier now, quieter, as if the castle itself had been waiting for their return. Kalen walked beside her, noting the small ways she moved, the way she adjusted the torches, tended to the animals, and moved through the rooms with silent purpose. He realized that he had begun to rely on her in ways he had never relied on anyone before. And the thought both thrilled and terrified him. That night, Kalen could not sleep. He walked the castle walls, the wind, cold, against his face. The moon hung high, silver and distant, and he could sense her watching him, as always. He longed to speak, to break the silence that separated them. But he did not. But instead, he watched the shadows, feeling the pull of something he could not name. And then he heard it, a howl, faint at first, then rising, echoing through the valleys and forests. It was her howl, Or perhaps it was the wolf within her, calling to the night. Kaelin's heart raced. He understood then that she was not just a protector. She was a force of nature, a being bound to a duty older than the kingdom itself. He called to her, his voice trembling. She emerged from the shadows, her gray eyes reflecting the moonlight. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. The wind carried the weight of unspoken words, the pull of trust, the tension of shared danger. "You are not just a servant," Kaelin whispered. "Bet."
You are more. And I do not know how to face that. But I want to. Her eyes softened slightly, a flicker of emotion that made his heart ache.
She did not speak, but the gesture was enough. Enough to tell him that she understood, that she felt, and that she had chosen to remain with him. Not as a servant, but as something greater, something legendary, something bound to him in ways he could not yet comprehend. The night stretched on, silent but alive, filled with tension, trust, and the beginnings of a bond neither of them fully understood. And in the shadows, Kaelin realized a truth he could not ignore. The ghost wolf had revealed more of herself, but the story was far from over. There were dangers ahead, revelations to come, and the promise of something more, something powerful and transformative.
The castle of Aldrin was silent as night fell.
A heavy shadow hung over the walls, darker than any storm or moonless night. Lord Kaelin stood on the battlements, eyes fixed on the forest that stretched endlessly beyond the castle gates. Something ancient stirred there, something alive, dangerous, and relentless. The air was thick with tension, and even the wind seemed to hesitate before it reached the towers. The ghost wolf was beside him, silent as always. Her gray eyes glimmered faintly, reflecting the silver light of the moon. Her presence was steady, unyielding, and somehow comforting. Kaelin had grown to rely on her more than he had ever relied on anyone, more than any sword, shield, or loyal soldier. She was not just a protector. She was a part of him now, a bond forged in danger, trust, and unspoken understanding. "Whatever comes," Kaelin whispered, "we face it together." Silence carried a weight heavier than any speech, a promise of loyalty, and perhaps of something deeper. The dark force that had been stirring in the forest was unlike anything Kaelin had ever faced. Villagers spoke of shadows that moved with intelligence, of whispers that carried curses, and of wolves whose eyes glowed with a strange light. Now, from the battlements, Kaelin could see the first signs. Black mist rising from the forest floor, twisting and curling like fingers reaching for the castle. He gripped his sword, feeling the familiar steel in his hands. But it was not enough. This was not a fight that could be won by strength alone. He needed her, her instincts, her speed, her power that surpassed any mortal weapon. The ghost wolf moved first, leaping from the battlements with a grace that made Kaelin's heart lurch. She landed silently, the black mist recoiling as if sensing her presence. Kaelin followed, descending the stairs 2 at a time, his sword ready. The castle's guards tried to rally, but fear held them frozen in place. They had heard the stories of the ghost wolf, and now they were witnessing it. In the clearing beyond the castle gates, the dark force coalesced into shapes that were almost human, almost animal, but neither. Shadows with glowing eyes circled, moving as one, whispering curses that chilled the soul. Kaelin felt a shiver run through him. He had faced enemies before, but never had he felt so powerless. The ghost wolf moved through the darkness with fluid, precise motions. She struck at the shadows, scattering them with movements that were more than human, strong, fast, and almost graceful, as if she were part of the night itself. Kaelin watched her, awe mixing with fear. Every time she attacked, the shadows recoiled, as if even they recognized her power. Yet as he fought alongside her, Kaelin saw the strain in her movements. The shadows were relentless, and each strike seemed to draw something from her: strength, life, and perhaps a piece of herself that he could not understand. "Kaelin!" Her silent voice, carried through the movement of her eyes, urged him to act. He charged into the fray, swinging his sword with precision, guided by her direction and instincts. Together they moved like a single force. Kaelin with the strength of the mortal world, she with the power of legends. The shadows shrieked and hissed, yet they could not break the bond between the two of them. In the heart of the battle, Kaelin realized the truth. This fight was not only against the shadows, but also against his own fear. The darkness fed on hesitation, on doubt, on the inability to trust. And he had trusted her, fully, without question. That trust became his greatest weapon. Bay. As the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, the shadows began to falter. Kaelin and the ghost wolf stood side by side, their movements coordinated, precise, unstoppable. And then, in a final surge of motion, she leapt forward, driving the last of the darkness back into the forest. The black mist dissipated, curling and breaking like smoke in the wind.
Kaelin fell to his knees, exhausted but alive.
The ghost wolf landed beside him, her chest heaving, eyes steady. For a moment the silence was complete. No wind, no whispers, no shadows. Only the quiet aftermath of a battle won not by might alone, but by unity and trust. He looked at her, truly looked, for the first time. The woman behind the legend, the heart beneath the wolf, stared back. Her eyes reflected the moonlight, the dawn, and something deeper. Centuries of stories, sorrow, and sacrifice. "You were magnificent," Kaelin said softly, his voice breaking the silence.
I never imagined anything like this. She tilted her head, and for the first time she moved closer, kneeling beside him.
Her presence was warm, alive, and human, and Kaelin felt an ache in his chest. He reached out, hesitating, then placed his hand gently on hers. She did not pull away. Instead, she allowed the contact, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between them. Fast, Kaelin realized that this was not just trust or loyalty. This was something more. Something that had been growing in silence, in shadows, in battles fought side by side. "You do not have to speak," he whispered. "I can see it in your eyes. I can see who you are, who you have been, and who you are choosing to be now." Bay. Her gaze softened, and in that moment Kaelin understood the depth of her sacrifice. The ghost wolf had been bound to a duty for centuries, forced to protect without rest, without companionship, without freedom. Yet she had chosen to remain with him, to fight beside him, and to share a piece of herself, even in silence. As the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Kaelin helped her to her feet. They stood together, the castle behind them, the forest stretching endlessly before them. The battle was over, but the world was not yet safe. He knew threats would come again, but for the first time he did not feel alone. "You are free," he said softly, almost reverently. "You do not have to be the ghost wolf if you do not want to. You can be yourself, here, now, with me." For a long moment she did not respond. Breath, then, slowly she lowered her head, and a soft, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Kaelin felt a warmth spread through his chest. This small gesture, simple human, was more powerful than any victory in battle. The castle's guards emerged cautiously, their eyes wide with awe and fear. They had seen the ghost wolf in action, had witnessed her strength and precision. Now, seeing her beside Kaelin, human and vulnerable, they understood that legends could take many forms. Some were fierce, some were silent. Some were bound by duty and choice alike. Kaelin walked beside her through the halls of the castle, noting the subtle ways she moved, the careful precision in her steps, and the quiet power that still lingered in her presence. But he realized that she had changed. Not entirely, not completely, but enough that she could begin to live her own life. They reached the gardens, where the first flowers of spring were beginning to bloom. The air was fresh with new life, and Kaelin felt a sense of hope he had not known in years. He turned to her, gray eyes meeting gray eyes, and for the first time he spoke her name aloud. Beh. I do not know everything about you, he said softly, but I want to. And I want to walk beside you, not as lord and servant, but as equals. Can you accept that? Her eyes held his, steady, unwavering. Slowly, she nodded. It was a small gesture, but it carried centuries of meaning, centuries of choice and trust. Pay. Kaelin felt a weight lift from his chest, the weight of loneliness, of fear, of battles fought alone. In the days that followed, the castle of Valdrin began to feel alive in a new way. The ghost wolf moved through its halls not as a shadow but as a presence both strong and human. Kaelin learned to see her not only as protector and legend, but as a companion, a partner, and perhaps something closer to a friend than either had ever known. And yet, the echoes of the past remained. She would never forget the centuries she had spent as the ghost wolf, the duty that had shaped her, and the lives she had saved in silence. Best. Kaelin understood this, and he respected it. He knew that love, trust, and companionship were built slowly, in moments of shared danger, quiet understanding, and mutual respect. One evening, under the silver light of a full moon, Kaelin and the ghost wolf stood together on the battlements. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth, and the forest below was calm, at peace for the first time in years.
Kaelin spoke softly. We have faced darkness together.
Inspiration. We have fought, survived, and protected. And now, perhaps, we can begin to live. She looked at him, gray eyes reflecting moonlight and something softer, hope, trust, and the quiet beginning of something more. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out, and Kaelin took her hand. For the first time, the legend of the ghost wolf was complete, not in silence, not in fear, not in duty alone, but in choice, in trust, and in the bond between two souls who had found each other in a world of shadows. And somewhere, in the distant forest, a lone howl echoed, a reminder that legends never truly fade, and that even in peace the ghost wolf would always remain a part of Valdrin. But now, for the first time, she was not alone. Kaelin and the ghost wolf stood together, watching the dawn, the light breaking over the horizon. The battles were over. The shadows had fled, and the bond between them had been forged in fire, trust, and silent understanding. Yes. The kingdom would face dangers again, and stories of the ghost wolf would continue to circulate in whispers and tales. But for Kaelin and her, the story had changed. The legend was no longer just of a protector in the shadows. It was of a woman who had chosen her path, and of a man who had found not just a protector but a companion, a partner, and perhaps, in time, something closer to a heart united. And as the sun rose over Castle Valdrin, gold spilling across stone and forest alike, Kaelin felt a deep and abiding truth. He had been saved not only by a legend but by a heart, strong and wild, that had finally chosen to trust. The ghost wolf was free, and together they would walk into the days ahead, not as lord and servant, not as legend and mortal, but as equals, bound by choice, courage, and the quiet power of a bond that could withstand even the shadows of the world.